Welcome to the Church Solutions Podcast, brought to you by JSL Solutions. The Church Solutions Podcast is designed to help equip you and your church in the use of technology and other tools and services. And now, here are your hosts, Steve Lacey and Phil Thompson.
And thanks for joining us today. How's everybody doing?
Hi, I'm Steve Lacey, mixing it up.
I mixed it up a little bit. I'm Phil Thompson, he's Steve Lacey, and we are a company called JSL Solutions.
And we're bringing you what? Church Solutions Podcast.
That's right, the Church Solutions Podcast, as the announcer said before us. And we're glad to have you here. We're a company that works with churches and ministries for streaming video, mobile apps, website templates, content management stuff.
That kind of thing. And we've got great content for today, right? What are we talking about?
Yes, very good segue. We do have great content for today. We're going to talk about 7 communication tips for your church staff and or volunteers.
All right. These are some things that I applied in my corporate world as well.
That's right.
I don't know sure where I learned them, but I did apply them.
Well, I think it's really good stuff. I think, everybody wants to work, or volunteer for an organization that has, a good work culture. You know what I mean? It's, everybody that's involved in leadership, they want to have a staff that's positive and, the morale is high. And but the problem is we don't always know how to get there to that. We want something that really is easy and a great place to work and be involved and volunteer, but it's difficult sometimes for us to kind of figure out, okay, how do we get to that kind of an environment? So that's what this is about.
Yes, we've got 7 communication tips. I just listened to a story on Bobby Knight, and he probably did not exercise these.
Bobby Knight, coach
these
for Indiana, and also Texas Tech, right?
Yeah, he's. I think is he at Texas Tech now?
He was, but he's no longer. I don't think.
Oh,
no,
okay.
No, he's retired quite a while ago. His son was in coaching too.
I did not know that.
Yeah, but he used to throw chairs at people, didn't he? Didn't Bobby Knight do something like that? He used to punch his people.
He did not apply these 7 tips that we're going to.
He had 7 tips.
Over. Yes, he did. He did win, but
yeah,
he was not. He probably not have been a big fan of what we're going to go over today.
All right. Well, let's go over it. So these are 7 communication practices that hopefully will improve your staff or volunteer culture. So the first one is confront privately and praise publicly.
Yes, this is rule number 1 that I know I applied in my former life in the corporate world, and that was, and it's kind of a thing that different styles of management. I felt that those that I respected the most applied this very well.
Okay,
and so
so
you basically you aren't going to reprimand or address someone on your staff in a negative way in public.
Right.
You will take them away privately and address any issues. But you do, if you have an opportunity for praise, you want to do that not privately but publicly.
Right. Yeah.
In front of their peers. Because
public embarrassment of volunteers or staff, it's harmful. It's very harmful to the culture, to the person, and so it's very important to do the things you just said. Correct privately, praise publicly. It not only does this help encourage the team member, but it also helps affirm and communicate expectations to the rest of the team.
And it's not hard to do. It takes a little bit of discipline because sometimes you're like, oh my gosh, I need to let this guy know that this is unacceptable, and we're in a staff meeting, and he's amongst his peers, and you want to go bite your tongue for a minute, or there's something great happens, and you want to schedule a time where you can be in front of other people to praise the person. Right, yeah. So it takes a little bit of discipline, but it's not too hard to do.
Yeah, and it will build a culture of what's the word? Positivity? Is that right? Positivity. What's the word there?
That sounds,
I can't get it.
Positivity? Sure.
Is that a word? It creates a culture of being positive. So, that would be a good thing. All right, so confront privately and praise publicly. Number 2.
So number 2, have difficult conversations in person.
In person. So I was thinking about this just the other day, and I think I posted it on Facebook. And I think I actually posted it on their streamingchurch.tv's Facebook status, and that was the evolution of human communication. It's gone from face-to-face to phone to email to now text with a negative frowning emoji. If you think about it, right? I mean, the face-to-face confrontation, people run from it, and then they may do it over the phone, but now they're doing it more with email or even texting now, and texting with the negative emoji. So anyhow, that was kind of a joke, but at the same time, it's true. Negative emails, text messages, they're just a bad idea. It leaves plenty of room for negative interpretation.
So these are difficult conversations. These are deals where you need to address bad behavior or just some challenging thing, and the inclination is, I'm not looking forward to this as much as this other person won't be looking forward to this. So maybe I'll just send them an email, and that's because what happens in person. There's a lot of body language that's going on that can be really miscommunicated if you're not doing this communication in person.
Yeah, and if you're talking to somebody and you sense their body language is, more of a negative, you can kind of correct a little bit and bring some encouragement in and kind of help, I guess cushion the difficult conversation a little bit, if I can say it like that. So, I mean, the bottom line is this: if you're contemplating communicating something in an email or a text or verbal conversation, remember this: write positive things and say difficult things, because if you try to write difficult things, they can be, again, misinterpreted.
Yeah, because reading the tone of a written thing can be misconstrued.
Yeah. It's easier to read the tone of positive.
That happens all the time.
Yeah. So I think
that's where when I told you my kids, they text us and we reply with okay. Yeah. And the culture now today is that okay really means you're really mad and upset. So
I didn't know that at the time, but
yes. So, and I was like, we didn't know that either. And they thought, wow, I guess they were assuming either we don't know what's going on, which is probably the case a lot, right. Or they're really upset with me saying that I will be there in 20 minutes, Yeah.
Okay. So, yes. But so how should you respond then? Just K or KK or
what? My kid said, KK is the I'm happy, and that sounds great. Okay. But this kind of ties into communicate in person, so they can listen to the tone of your voice, because it could be just like you said, okay, or it could be okay.
Yeah. Well, good stuff. All right, KK. All right, so. Again, face-to-face is the best thing to do there. Somebody's knocking on your door.
Yes, I'm getting texts while we're doing the podcast.
All right, well, good for you. You can multitask. I can't. So number 3, when we talk about communication tips for your church staff and volunteers, encourage more than correct. So there's that old joke, and I remember watching All in the Family years ago.
They started this?
Well, I remember hearing it for the first time in All in the Family because I thought it was a funny joke. And it's the idea of, like, the wife breaks down in tears and says to her husband, they've been married for decades, I don't even know if you love me anymore. Mm-hmm. And Archie Bunker says to Edith, he looks shocked and surprised. He says, look, Edith, I can't do the New York accent, but he goes, I told you I loved you the day I married you. If it changes, I will let you know. So the idea behind this is, you want to constantly encourage and when you're communicating, try to be more encouraging than you are correcting. And sometimes that's hard if you're in leadership, because if you're very analytical like me and you're in, I do a little part-time gig as an executive director for a church. I'm very much task-oriented when I'm in that mode. And so I'm looking at things that need to change, need to be fixed, need to be corrected. And it's very tempted to, when you see somebody in charge of that department, a volunteer or even a staff person, to say, look, we need to do this, we need to do that. It's easy for me to get in the corrective mode. And, there's nothing wrong with that. If you're involved in leadership, you want things to that need to be changed to change. But the bottom line with this little comment here is that you really need to season it with encouragement and try to encourage as much as you can, more than you do when it comes to communicating correction. Does that make sense?
Yes. So,
yeah.
And a good way to kind of assess yourself is just try to weigh the conversations that you've had and say, how many of those were,
right?
How much of that was correcting and versus commending?
Yeah. And again, some of this stuff, as you said earlier, it takes a little bit of discipline if you're leading a team or something as a volunteer that's a leader, or a staff person that's a leader, because, you're trying to get stuff done, and it's easy to see all the issues and you want to fix those issues, but got to remember people are involved in the equation here. They're humans. They have feelings. They need encouragement.
Right. So number 4 on our list is be transparent.
Be transparent. So this is a little difficult for introverts. And by the way, I'm finding, I don't know about you, but I have found that a lot of leaders are introverts. I see more leaders that are introverts than I do extroverts. Introverts are people that, they process things internally. Extroverts are people out there. My wife's an extrovert, and she actually gets her fuel from being around other people. That fires her up. She's an extrovert. My batteries get drained when I'm with groups of people for a long period of time, like 10 minutes. Just kidding. But it drains me. So I get my batteries charged by being alone. If she's alone for a long time, her batteries get drained because she's an extrovert.
So what the introvert will tend to do is process things internally and not let people know what they're thinking.
Exactly.
And so I actually had a boss for many years back in the corporate world, and I thought he was the master. I definitely an introvert, because he'd call me into his office and we'd start talking about something, and he would stop talking and just look at me. And I could not avoid letting the silence go. So every time I walked out of his office, I'm like, he got me to say more than I was ever anticipating saying.
Yeah. So
it was just like, he was just that awkward pause. He could just pull it off, no problem.
Right.
And I don't know if that was part of his strategy, or if maybe he was just an introvert and didn't have anything to say, and so that's what he would do. But he wasn't indicating the conversation was over. He just indicating, I'm not going to say anything right now, and if you don't say anything, we're just going to stare at each other for a few minutes.
It's kind of like, what is it, the negotiating stuff? Whoever talks first loses.
Yeah, I lost that every time. But he was a great boss, though.
Yeah, well, I think it has a lot to do with your personality, and I think the problem is if you're an introvert and you're leading, or even if you're working with somebody, you're forcing people sometimes to figure out what's going on.
Or what you're thinking,
and what you're thinking. And so sometimes you just need to force yourself to communicate. And, there's times that it would be appropriate to do that. Like my wife, when we're thinking about doing something, whatever it might be, either going out somewhere or even a project or something around the house, or even dealing with our teenage son, her thoughts are, because she's an extrovert, she's just, as she thinks, she's talking. May not be what she wants to do, may not even be any intention totally of what she wants to do, but she will just talk about this and that. And I'm like, well, you really want to do that? Well, no, I'm just thinking out loud. And where I'm more of I just don't really say much about it until, I'm forced to say something or whatever. But I think there's a balance there. I do think you need to think it out a little bit before you spill the beans, but you still need to let people know what's going on. And especially if you're in leadership, you gotta communicate the vision. You got to be clear about some of the things, or where you're trying to go on something. So anyhow, it's all about creating an environment of trust.
Yes,
letting your team in on your thought process when appropriate.
Yes. So we're going over the 7 tips for communication within your staff. So number 5 on our list.
It's number 5.
Be optimistic.
Be optimistic. All right. So optimistic leaders really do attract followers. Pessimistic leaders tend to attract negative people as well. There's a quote in here, and I'm paraphrasing, but the idea was this: in difficult times, the unbridled optimism of a leader will carry the day. So
yes.
Sometimes if times are rough, sometimes at least some optimistic thinking will maybe get you through it until, a solution comes about.
And it's got to be realistic, optimistic thinking. You can't, because you'll lose it there as well if people think, oh my gosh, this guy's he's such a pie in the sky dreamer that he doesn't have his feet on the ground. And but having some realistic optimism is important as a leader, and then you need to communicate that. Yeah.
But again, optimism, I think it's a powerful tool, because I think, as we know, even in business and in ministry, I have a friend in ministry who took over a church, and that's always the hardest thing when a pastor takes over a church that's been around for a while, and there's, he's got a different vision or a different idea on how to do things. He gets a ton of criticism. I mean, he's the new guy, so to speak, and now he's trying to take it a different direction. And one of his famous quotes is, and now he's been doing it for years and years. His quote is, how have you been able to be so successful, especially through the changes you've made? And the answer is, I just outlasted my critics. I think he said outlived my critics. And I think that's true. I mean, a lot of times you're going through a difficult time. You just got to be optimistic. You need to be positive. And you just need to hang in there. And you don't want to be unrealistic, but there are usually some positive things you can see, and if you can hang on to those things for a little while, it might help you through a difficult time. So optimism is definitely a good thing to do. I'd rather work for somebody that was optimistic, maybe even a little bit too much optimistic at times, than somebody that's always negative.
Right.
So that's just thoughts on it there.
Number 6 on our list of communicating
We're moving through this thing really well.
So be a raving fan publicly and a frank critic privately.
Who's Frank? Frank as in being honest and... Yeah, I get what you're saying.
It is capitalized on our notes, but I think it's not Frank.
I think that's true. I mean, it's easy. And again, I fall in the mode of being very analytical a lot of times. And it's easy to get in conversations about how we could do this differently, or how we could have done it differently, and why this isn't working. We should be doing this. Sometimes it's easy, and your intent may not be to cause gossip. Your intent may not be to tear down, but you're trying to be constructive critically. But if you're not careful, the wrong people can hear that, and they can't process it, I guess is what I'm saying. And so you may see issues and faults in your church, but you need to be very, very careful who you share that with, because it can snowball into a major problem.
How you share that with.
And how you share it. Who you share it with and how you share it. Yeah. Absolutely.
So there was an example in our notes talking about worship leader just blowing a particular song, and somebody's congregation member comes up after the service and complains to the pastor. He says, that song, you just butchered that song. And the response is that to come across as he says, wow, we do all kinds of different things in our music, and we really try to mix it up and really try to do an excellent job. Yeah. And our worship leader is really on the ball. Mm-hmm. So you're coming across as publicly across as a huge fan of the church and everything's going on. Yeah. But privately, you may want to meet with that worship leader and go, what were you thinking?
Yeah. Yeah. I remember I was having a meeting one time. I wasn't the senior pastor. I was on staff, and somebody in the band was playing was in the wrong key or something on the guitar. They were playing the wrong chord progression. And certain people on the staff just let the music director hear all about that. I mean, it wasn't even her that was doing it. It was somebody on her team that was playing, I mean, come on, people make mistakes, and maybe there's time for correction, but you don't have to make it a huge deal, unless it is a huge deal. But most of the time it's not a huge deal.
You don't want to throw anyone under the bus publicly.
No, not at all. And I think that this is a good point. Be a fan publicly, and be frank in a critical manner in a very private setting, and be very discreet. And by the way, I heard something this past weekend that I've never heard before. I don't know why I got on it. I was thinking about music. The gal leading our music sneezed during a song. It was at the end of a service, and she sneezed really loud twice. I've never heard that ever. I've never heard a music person that was leading a song sneeze. There was a whole band up there. It wasn't just her, but it was just funny. It's
amazing. We have not heard more of that, but yes.
She sneezed twice. It was just hilarious. I don't know. Anyhow, I'm getting off track here, but
so this last one I think can go either way, in my opinion.
Yeah, you don't like this, do you? This last point.
What do you mean?
So the last point is have relationships outside of the office.
This is with your staff.
With your staff. Have relationships outside the office with your staff.
Yeah, because I know that back in my corporate life when I was leading a group of people, I tended to be much more friendly and available and social with people that worked for me. But the person that actually took over the group later had the complete opposite, kind of thing. So I guess there can be good and bad, but this is kind of leaning, the notes we have here are talking towards having relationships outside the office with those that report to you. I guess on the pro side is you really become authentic with the people. They get to know them. Right. Plus your days are much better because you're working with people that you want to hang with anyway. Right. So a good example is I would go to lunch with people that work for me, and the boss that took over never would go to lunch with anybody. So, and I don't know. It was different styles.
So you think that's a good thing that person that took over didn't have any relationships with anybody outside of work, so to speak? Outside
of work, I mean, there's pros and cons both ways.
Yeah.
So
I could see that.
Yeah, there was the not having the social. It became a little more sterile, a little more formal,
right?
A little, more. I don't know. It's not the right word, but militaristic kind of a thing. I'm the boss. You're the underlings, and we're going to run a tight ship. And as opposed to mine was much more looser environment where, the people that work for me
there's friendship involved.
Yeah.
I had a leader, and I think in the church world, maybe it's a little different. I don't know. Maybe we can hear from some of our listeners about this point. But I had a friend who would say, especially with his leadership team, he would say, we are friends first, leaders second. Friends first, leaders second. And that resonates with me. I think that if you're on a leadership team, that I think friendship is important, especially in a church environment. Maybe not at Raytheon. I don't know. I don't know how that works. But I think, sometimes developing good relationships, especially, again, ministry might be a little different,
That's probably true.
Just because you're dealing with people and trying to help people and all that. I don't know. But I think one of the things I remember somebody telling me years ago was before I would hire somebody, I'd take them out to eat for like lunch or dinner or something, and I'd see how they would treat the waitress. And if they were rude to the waitress, I didn't want them on my staff. Because if they're going to be rude to somebody like a waitress or a waiter, what are they going to be like to other people that are, so to speak, under them, I guess, or whatever. So I thought that was a good thing. And then, in our notes here, somebody talks about the Friday night test. Would I, is this the type of person and family I would want to spend time with on a Friday night? Talking about, somebody they're going to hire. If the answer was no, I shouldn't hire them. Because I wouldn't work hard at building a relationship with them outside the office. So I don't know. Their point is if it's yes, then it made the job easier because it helped develop stronger working relationships and improve staff culture.
I think probably the primary danger on the negative side for this is that people will perceive you as developing favorites. You're like, oh, he goes to lunch with Joe and Bob, and he rarely goes to lunch with Larry and Mary.
I do think,
and so and just divorcing yourself from everybody socially.
I think that's a good point. I think if you're going to have relationships outside of the office, so to speak, you better make sure you do it, equally with the people you work with. I think, at least to some degree, because I think that could be interpreted. I'm not part of the inner circle. He is or she is.
Right.
But I can understand that. All right. Well, we'd love to get your feedback on this, folks. You can send us an email, support@streamingchurch.tv. That's one of the ways you can contact us. And we'd love to get your thoughts on this. We're all about helping churches and ministries. That's why we don't always talk about technical things. But, because we're a tech company, we do. But we're also involved in our own churches and our own ministries. And so we're all about helping volunteers and helping staff and leaders, make the most of what they're doing and help them grow. Because, as I've said before, Steve and I have like 258 years of ministry experience, so we ought to put it to work, right?
That's right.
All right, good. So we're done here. Again, feedback's appreciated. We thank you for the privilege of your time today. Thanks for listening to the Church Solutions Podcast. He is Steve Lacey. I'm Phil Thompson. We'll catch you next time on another edition. Take care.